on just an incredible amount and variety of projects. Another production run of pipes for Richard Oliver. We've got these hopefully down to a science now, where we can make multiples. Our last tape, we finished testing all the different tests we wanted to get our calids down to under a ½ ounce, and we were successful in doing that. Now it's just a question of making production parts. Those cones have already been made. Some are out being post-cured already. We have half of the fuse, the base plate done, and the second half yet to be done. Now we have Les's tail, which is just about finished, and he'll be making the elevators the next time he gets to the shop. So let's get down to the shop. We got a lot of work to do. Even though it's the holiday season, it gives us a little time to reflect on how lucky we all are around the holidays, have such good friends, and have a good time, and looking forward to having a great 2004. And of course, when you're deep in a winter like this, where it's really cold out and miserable and nasty and snowing and everything, what you really look forward to are those first days of spring. They have done some work on what amounts to be our brand new fly-in field across the street, across the river from Palisade Park. Rich has been monitoring it, and he said it's really coming out nice. So we're going to go over and try to see that once the snow melts. That we always have in the shop is just entertaining Chicky and keeping him from eating the carbon fiber parts. Now, I got a couple hours here, and I thought what I'd do is I'd spend them working on this. This is basically one of the plugs we're going to have. We've got the first one done. We've already got parts out. We've already got that fine-tuned. We'll save the biggest one for last. And by the way, that's a good way to do it. Whenever you're working with new material, new molds, new anything, do the small ones first, just to get your hands familiar with them. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to sand all of these. This is Brodak primer. We put 3 coats on total. It's dried out a couple of days. I want to get it sanded smooth with 600. It's only so I can get the part to release easily. That's the only objective there. We're not going to actually use that material. But then once that's sanded out, then I'll put on 3 or 4 coats of high temperature wax, and then this will be ready to PVA. Most important single area to get right on this is to get this seam around the end where the 2 parts join, because we're going to use that for a parting line. And what I found is if you have a sanding block, now you can see this one is only back cut about 10 degrees, 20 degrees. These are the ones Bob Martens made us years ago, and we use them every day. I don't want to use the carbide one because I don't use that for sand and paint. And Brodak primer, usually very easy to sand. In fact, this corner here I can just peel back. What I want to do is just work that seam, spend an hour or so getting this final sanded, and then it'll be ready to wax. You don't need to put any more material on here or anything. And you can see, as always, all the Brodak materials, they just powder right off. That's what makes the finishing just be a fraction of the time you would take if you were using some other method. This is really the quickest method I know. Whatever's in second place is a long way back. Now, I'm really getting excited about having this mold that again, I'm working that seam. That seam is the most important thing to get a nice transition. That not only when we put the gel coat on there, but having that seam, if it's got little holes where the material can run underneath, it just makes for an ugly looking mold. Anyway, any 320, 220 paper, getting that all finalized. I'll spend about the next hour or so getting that really nicely sanded, and then we'll do the high temperature wax. All the sanding done, and again, it doesn't have to be a mirror finish. The wax is going to help do some of that. But what I want to do, I want to take this as Parol high temperature wax. Now, obviously what would happen if we were to lay up gel coat and make a mold out of this, and we didn't properly prepare it, you'd never get the plug out. Or you'd get the plug out with a lot of grief. And a lot of times we don't get the plug out when we do the preparation. It's still a problem. So, what they recommend is, on this kind of a mold, typically is 1 hour apart, is to put on a light coat of wax, buff it off 4 times 1 hour apart. Now the reason for that is, and buff it off with clean paper towels or a clean Turkish towel. When the wax is on big, thick, and gloppy, or you don't get it all off, that's when you have a catastrophic lockup. You need to polish it so there's just one molecule of wax, and of course try to impart as smooth a surface as possible. Now in this case, we don't have any reverse angles, so we don't need draft angles or anything. This should make a relatively simple mold. The other part's going to be a lot more complicated, and that's why, because my time is limited today, I thought I'd just try to get one of these parts prepped. Then once the 4 coats are on, then I can spray PVA on, typically 2 or 3 coats until this part has a coating of PVA, and then it'll be ready to get out the gel coat and make the mold. The best thing is just to get some on here, not to really build it up too heavy. You've got to take one little spot at a time, and the most important thing, of course, is to get in that groove. Now this is one part I learned. You can't rush. You can't just wax this like you wax in your car and run off and then, not pay attention. You've got to do a little maintenance, a little time, and not get the wax on thick. Now see, I'm spreading this out, wax on, wax off, like that dumb kid in that movie. So anyway, even right over the primer. You let that dry and then buff it. But then after you buff it, you let it sit for an hour before you put the next coat on. If you wind up putting coat after coat, you just build up a big, disgusting amount of wax. Now, usually that'll dry in a minute or two. Now we can just, as soon as it dries, we can buff one little spot out and then move to the next spot. And you can see where you've waxed it and where you haven't. Now once this is dry, and again, this is time consuming. This is not a 2-minute quick job. You can see it's already picking up some of the material. But the thing, if you're going to have a problem and you're going to make a mold, the first mold, let's say you make a little cowling mold or a little mold for something, then the first and most important thing is you got to be able to release the part. Or you basically, really in a high-risk area that you'll be disappointed. Now, I find clean paper towels work well for me, but other people like Ed Gallagher like terry cloth or like towels or Roject towels or something. And by the way, we've been watching all of these. We got there's 6 2-hour videos over there of this basically airbrushing. I'm getting psyched to do some airbrush work. Hope Les has been watching them too, some fancy paint job in mind. He's already thinking about pearl paints for this next plane, but we'll see. Okay, now just look at, once you get a spot, I don't know if you can even see the gloss from here. See if you can get up close. You can see where I know you can hear it. But anyway, I'll do the rest of this off camera. This is going to basically consume the rest of the day. 4 coats, an hour between coats, and make sure you get every single drop off before we put on the PVA. Now, one of the tips I didn't put on tape is when I'm getting in these angles and corners with wax, I have this little, I call it a polywog. They call them something else, tadpoles, polywogs, frogs. I'm not sure, but what that does, that allows you to get right in that crease, and because we want that crease to be one of the high definition areas, it also lets you get up in here. We have spent quite a bit of time working on this, but I know in the past when you want a quality mold, some of the time that you spend seems like you're not making any progress, but then when you pull those parts out and they have that nice edge, all at once it seems like you get paid back. Anyway, that is one of the good tips for getting the wax on, and needless to say, when we go to take it off, we can wrap paper towels around there. It would be nice if we didn't have them all bundled up like this. And this makes a good way when you're going to get in there and get that wax out, because you don't want a big wax buildup on any mold. No matter what it is, you don't want a big waxy buildup. Just as an example, it pulls the wax out real nice. That is a good tip too, by the way. Now we got a little time in between coats, so what I'm going to do is try to make the same kind of a base plate, a little nose piece and tail piece out of balsa wood scraps. Try to find some scrap material, because we need to make what amounts to be the base plate for the fuselage. And it's going to have the reverse cuts of this in it. And we can use up scrap wood for that. That's not going to be a problem. And once an hour, we'll just come back here and put a little more wax. Now, I've tried in the past, because I in the beginning of doing molding, I used to have parts that really were difficult to release, and I tried putting 10 coats of wax on, and it seems like you don't hurt anything. It isn't that you're adding more wax, but you're getting more polish on it, and a smooth part tends to release easier than one that's difficult. And believe me, the first time you make a mold and it doesn't release, you get instant religion. Kind of self-explanatory what we need to do, but most of all is to get a block up here so this material will run off. It doesn't need to run off into a point, but it needs a runoff. Otherwise, up here we get those little wrinkles and things that we don't want. Same thing in the back. I need to come out here at least an inch, 3/4 of an inch on each side, so I have what amounts to be a rib that keeps the mold rigid. Now, all of these molds, there's several ways to do these molds. Believe me, it's not the only way to do it, but I think the way that I've developed over the years with the Typhoon and the various other planes, Miss Ashley, I think that the nice part about it is pretty much anybody can do it. There's really nothing high-tech about it. But the next step is going to be to get all those balsa wood pieces in place, and we'll do that basically off camera. It's just we need to build a little ledge around the whole perimeter of the mold. This is a good place to use up some of my 12-pound wood. I just need to carve the block in front, the block in back, and we'll be all set. Okay, all the blocks are on. The first coat of primer is on, and we know we need about 3 or 4 coats in this case. Small block in the back. And it'll be best if we can just let this sit for a couple of days once I get all the primer on. But for sure, early next week, we'll be ready to lay up the mold. So this morning, this is what our breakfast looked like this morning. Got birds out there, and it is snowing. And they're predicting more snow all day, so because we're in the lovely real estate business, we get to shovel out all our houses on a day like today. We don't get to do much in the shop, but I guess these birds don't have much to do either. It's really nice getting up in the morning to this stuff. How I look forward to shoveling snow. It's such a thrill. And they said it's really going to snow today. Some days it's just not that much fun being windy. Oh man, this is what I love. Ugh. Anyway, after we get all our necessary work done, I guess it'll be a joy getting back to the warm shop with a cup of coffee and maybe working some more on that fuse plug. Some days it just isn't fun being windy. Look at poor birds up there. These poor birds, I wonder where they get food to eat. We feed them about 6 times a day. You can see them at the feeder there. Those poor guys up on a wire here. Life in the Northeast. Hey, I heard today that Dave Midgley is buying his son for Christmas a Kawasaki dirt bike, and he's getting one one of his own too, so that he can go farther in sun riding. Now the only problem with Dave is I'm not so sure he's a world champion motocross bike rider yet. I guess we're going to find out. Anyway, that's what it was like today, and I'm glad it's over. Here's one of the things we really look forward to every time it snows. This is one of two cardinals, and cardinals, of course, pair for life. And he visits our feeder on a regular basis. He's sitting out there all covered with snow. Look at this guy. And he'll just come, as we're having our breakfast here, or supper, or lunch, whatever, he'll just come right to the feeder. And he finds a nice little place in the neighbor's yard here to hang out. I don't know. Hey, I guess a lot of other people enjoy feeding birds and raising birds, and birds are wonderful little creatures. And we love every one of them that come to our feeder. We spend a lot, maybe more time than we should, feeding these guys. And he's just checking it out. He's just waiting to see. All right, you guys are done with breakfast? That's fine with me. No problem. He'd sit out there all afternoon. Boy, he's beautiful. Oh, the female's right next to him. I didn't even see the female.
Yeah, she's to the right.
The female's off to the side.
Look at the color of that cardinal.
Yeah, and actually, Karen, this is the female. Look at her face, how nice she is. She's all puffed up because it's cold.
It's cold and snowy.
Now, if he was a good male, he'd provide a nice big house with central heating for his woman. But in the meantime, they sit out there, and boy, do we love feeding them in the winter. This is one of the things Karen and I really, really, really look forward to. Every time it snows, we have what we call customers, and they come up here, and so what a great way to start a day that you have to do relatively boring or routine work. Have your friends join you for breakfast. Well, yesterday, despite having a lot of snow, there was one tremendous good piece of news. They found Saddam Hussein. And this morning when I changed the paper in Chicky's cage, I never realized I was putting a picture of Saddam in his cage. Well, Chicky, you know what you can do to Saddam right now? Go over on that side of the cage. Give Saddam a little present. See, that's what happens when you don't build model airplanes. Chicky, go do what you do best to Saddam. I'm sure he'll appreciate it. Today we made the last cowl I hope that we're going to need. We have 5 real nice ones from this mold, but you can see what's happened to the mold after making these parts. You have little spots where there's little imperfections and stuff. These are the little places that we've never cleaned off the molding rubber. So what I want to do before I put this mold away for a while, and may or may not need it for a while, is just take my raw fingernail, get in there. Another trick is I use this material here when I'm done, Universal Mold Release. As soon as I have this all cleaned up, and you don't want to use a razor blade or anything like this, you want to just clean it with your bare fingernail. And you can see that gets most of it up. And you want to put the mold away for storage. Now, what I found is I have a spot up under my train layout where I store all the molds. And I have them all cataloged and in order, of course. But this one has served its purpose well. We even made a few spares. They're out being post-cured today. When that's done, I'll put a coat of mold release on it. Put it in a plastic bag and put it away. Now this one here, we still need to make one more part from, but you can see this has really been making really nice parts. I wound up after making one part shimming this just so I would have the exact curve that I wanted, but really wasn't. In fact, as I'm doing this on camera, I have it in here backwards. That's the way it should go. That little shim really got the angle just right. Same thing with this. I'm going to make one more part with this, and then put some mold, clean the molds, put some mold release on them, and put them up under the train layout. We're hopefully done with them for a while. But before we actually start this fuselage mold, a couple of tips. When you're making a mold, and I know several people have looked at the video and actually gone on to make some really nice molds, maybe nicer than mine. The the first step that I decide, and this is just my technique for doing them, you have to make a decision early on. Is it going to be a hard mold or a soft mold? And that's a decision that can change everything. Now, a soft mold is a rubber mold, which you've seen that nose cone. We're not going to repeat that. But usually that's molding rubber. This is almost like molding tips 101. When you use molding rubber, the advantage is you can have a part that's shaped like this, that's bigger here. I'm just going to reverse this. So it has reverse draft angle. And I'll explain what draft angle is for anybody who doesn't know. So you can make that part, and then you can basically bend this away and get the part out, which is a common thing when you have reverse draft. Now, what draft angle is, if you make a mold and the part has no draft, it's just perfectly flat. Well, that's zero draft. Now, if the part gets bigger inside the mold and you made a hard mold, it'd be really difficult to get the part out, or you'd have to separate the mold somehow. And that really gets into complex mold making, something out of the hobbyist range. What we're trying to do is make this that anybody can do it, or that guys like me can do it on a very, very limited budget with a limited amount of time and energy. So having reverse draft, whenever you have a reverse draft in a cowl, in a part, in anything, it almost guarantees you either use rubber molding or you got to make a complex mold that comes apart. And that gets out of the realm of, where I'm not sure how many people would want to spend, beside Dave Midgley, spend that kind of time and energy and money. So, but our fuselage, the two parts of our fuselage have no draft angle. In other words, if you look at a cross-section of the fuselage, they basically always have that. There's zero draft here and here. So we'll be able to get the part out. Now what that allows you to do is make what's known as a hard mold. A hard mold being that we're going to make a fiberglass composite, whatever you want to call it. We're going to make a shell around the original plug. The plug is what's called the part that's inside. Sometimes it's called a buck. We're going to build a mold around it, and then we're basically not going to need this part after that. We're going to try to just pull it out. But there's a couple of things that can really make this difficult, whether it's a wheel pant mold, a wingtip mold, a cowl mold. One of the things when you're making a hard mold that's extremely important, and I learned this the hard way, is to get what's called the release prep done. Now, we've already done the waxing on one of the parts. We need to wax the other part. We need to get a coating, a thin coating of material in here that actually no part of the epoxy will ever touch the plug. And this is usually made up of this thin, called a release agent, is made up of 3 or 4 layers of wax, each an hour apart and buffed as much as you can buff them. That's the wax. And then there's usually PVA. Now PVA, you can brush it on or you can spray it on. I like to spray it on, and you can spray it in thin coats. And then it's this entire coating that allows the plug to come out, or in our case, we're not trying to save it and probably won't be able to get it out in one piece, but at least allows us to get it out. It also, the surface of the PVA, if you've prepared the material surface, let's just pretend this is the surface of the plug. If you've prepared this, buffed it, cleaned it, waxed it, and made a nice smooth surface, the wax stays smooth and the PVA will be a real nice smooth surface. And the smoother it is, the easier it'll come apart. So what we're going to do in the next day or two, and I wanted to put these, this is just basically how we're going to do it. I want to wax the bigger of the 2 fuse parts, get all my material ready, my gel coats and resins and everything, and I'll try to include all that information on. But this is a relatively is always the right word here, to make, it's going to look like a big bathtub when it's done. To make that mold is, first off, it's relatively simple, relatively inexpensive. It takes you out of the realm of hard aluminum molds, things that need machining. If you can make the plug and do a nice job on the plug and get it buffed out and cleaned out, I'm guessing it's probably under $100 worth of material, you can make a mold. And whether that's an Impact fuselage or an SV11 or a Cardinal or a Typhoon or whatever, the method that I used, and I don't know how original it is, so we may as well not even think about it, but then again, I don't know anybody else that's done this, so I can't, yeah, if you're the Wright brothers and you didn't know that the people in France are trying to do the same thing, you don't know if you're good, bad, or mediocre, but I know we have done it and have had success with this method, and I'm looking forward to making this mold in the next week or so, but the preparation, this part of it is so critical. You cannot skimp on this part of it. Once you have this part prepped and the PVA in, then actually making the part is just a question of making some test parts, seeing how much material or what material you're going to use. It gets relatively simple. But up to this part where we are now, we're going to get these coats of wax on, get this PVA on, and another thing that's critical is I keep a separate gun for PVA, a totally separate gun. Now when you have a dedicated gun, we'll have to make this real fancy. You've got this marked somehow. You really don't even have to mark it because you'll notice stuff will be oozing out all over the place. But what they really want you to do with PVA is spray it unthinned. Now I've tried thinning it with water. You can it's water soluble, so you can thin it with water. Boy, does that get difficult to do. That gets really where you really have to be a master and not get runs. But if you spray it full strength, and I use 90 psi, and that's what they recommend on the jug. PVA is about $10 a gallon, relatively inexpensive, so it makes it a good modeling product. It's not toxic, it doesn't give you headaches, it doesn't kill all the animals in the neighborhood. So it's a nice material to use, but to get the proper coat of PVA on, it really has to be a thin coverage coat. But if you make it too thick, what it tends to do is peel off like saran wrap. And as soon as you touch it, it peels off. Then it gets to be difficult. So we're looking for, when we come to do that, a very thin, just turn the surface green. It's got a green dye in it. When we get to that point, just the slightest hint of green and a nice even smooth coat, and we'd be ready to lay up that mold. But anyway, I thought these are good things, because several people, including Doran, by the way, have been watching videos and trying to make little molds, and I know many people have already made the molds. So it just, any little tip or information I can put on there, just we're one step ahead. And Midgley met with Northern Fiberglass this morning, and he had a list of things that they're going to try to contribute to our molding project very soon. They had some tips and some tricks, and so he's got some literature and some glue he's sending me. But this is basically the things it took me now 4 or 5 years to put this together, and I honestly and truly think, just now Jose Modesto's already doing a lot of these things, but if we share the information, it'll just be a lot more fun. And if you've been around the videos long enough, seen the Typhoon video, you know the Typhoon videos, 100% carbon fiber body, even the crutch is carbon, and that worked out well. I thought that was a pretty cool plane, flew well. If it didn't fall apart with a 91 Sato in the front, spinning a 15-inch prop on throttle control, I don't know that it would have ever broken. Our original Miss Ashley had a carbon fiber body and belly pan. The whole fuselage itself was carbon fiber. The B-25 has carbon cowls. Anytime you can make a part out of carbon, boy, now we're using them again on the A-26. It's more and more convenient. Gets to be more and more fun even. And of course we know that it's not out of the realm of what we already have done to make a wing out of carbon fiber. We've already made carbon fiber flaps. So just pushing this envelope and working with these products and working with this and sharing the information on video really gives us a lot of choices for the future of modeling, and I think it's just a lot more fun. Just the bottom line, it's more fun. As if we didn't have enough good news today, we got a message from Bob Zambelli that Tom Hampshire and Bob have in their house, in Bob's house, the first Brodak prefab kit plane. And it's an Oriental, and it's built in China, I believe. We don't have one here yet. But we're going to be hopefully getting together soon. And boy, if that isn't going to change the way we do things. See what's happening to the event. The big picture is the event is changing. It's getting more modern. It's like, yeah, we'd all like to have the good old days when you could run engines without mufflers, and we all yen for those days, but the reality is we have to live in the 20th century here. Look at this chick, he just flew over to see me. Yeah, chick, they got Saddam. You can go poop on his picture, too. Maybe I'll leave that picture in there for a while until he's covered up. Anyway, just some of the thoughts we have in today's shop. We got to go out and shovel snow, so it's just another one of these crappy days. We have really been getting killed with weather. Now, all I can say is, if you had to make a list of things that can go wrong when you're doing your first mold or one of your first molds, and I remember when I was experimenting in the very beginning, around the time we made the Spitfires, I got interested in molding. I remember buying a lot of videos, and they'd always leave out one step. I remember buying a great video on how to make a cowl for your laser, and the one thing I watched the video for an hour or whatever it went, the one thing I wanted to know was how did they get the release agent on, and they just skipped over it. Well, so sometimes on my videos I tend to be a little redundant, but I think if somebody is buying one of these videos or if they're just watching them, they really want to do this. Or you want to watch me fail, one or the other, I'm not sure. But there's a lot of pitfalls, but the biggest pitfall of all is at this step right now, not getting the right release agent, wax, or trying to rush through this. Now, I was shoveling snow a good part of this day, chopping ice and spreading salt on my properties, but I never forget that it's this point that you really have to spend the time. And what'll happen is the first time you make a mold and the part doesn't release, or when you're making a part and you destroy the mold, that's even worse. And that's called a catastrophic lockup. Now imagine if we skimped on this, and this part, this plug, which we have a lot of hours in, you really don't see it on the video, but there's a lot of hours in this. This could be destroyed just by bad preparation. So if you decide you're going to make a wheel pant or a cowling or whatever, and you're going to use a hard mold, this is one step you just can't skimp over. There's just no way. And even if I'm sound a little redundant, each time I wax this and let it dry, polish it off, get those 4 coats of wax on, make sure the surface, whatever surface you have here, that's the surface the PVA is going to roll over, and that's what's going to make the part. And when it's real smooth, that's when it just releases nice. Very, very pleasant. When it doesn't release, then you want to just get out the bottle of vodka and... Anyway, just some tips. I'm going to do the rest of this off camera because we'd like to get the PVA on this in the next day or so. Spend the time with the wax, spend the time polishing it up. I want to leave out one, because again, I'm trying to remember all the little things that I do innately. When I get the first couple of coats of wax on, get an old sock, and we have plenty of these socks. You can see Wendy wears the socks till they have holes in them. Reverse it so the fluffy side is on the outside. Now this is really good if you're going to buff it out with Gorhams. If you're going to buff it out, you're going to wipe your plane off. If you're just going to wipe it off. Socks do 2 things. They keep you from sticking your fingernail, and in my case I'm always trimming my nails. The first time you wipe a plane off and stick a fingernail in a fillet or something, you'll be trimming your nails. But anyway, another good tip is the socks. Now, I don't have one now because I don't really need it. I used to have two socks, but on the case of this kind of a mold, I want to be able to hold it. And what happens as I get one coat after another of wax on here, I try to segment this and do this much, to maybe divide this into 6 pieces. Well, because you have to let this dry, I just want to make a little demonstration of how nice this works. Supposing we let this dry, and of course we will let it dry when we do a real coat, this is just a demonstration. Then the nice thing is you have a rubber glove on one hand that holds the part so you don't have to squeeze it. When it's your bare hand, you've got to squeeze it. And the other hand has a sock, so it kind of protects you. If we were buffing out, let's say you had a Nobler and you were just buffing it out. Well, boy, is this handy. If you've never used old socks before, that's one of the tips you can get off the video, whether you're buffing, waxing, cleaning a plane, degreasing it. And it seems like everybody I know, I guess we're all poor, has plenty of socks. And whenever I don't have a pair of old socks, you know what I do? I go up in the drawer and just take a pair of new socks. For a couple of bucks that socks cost, as opposed to the money you spend, if this part doesn't release from the mold, we're going to be out a lot more money than the cost. We'll be able to buy a sock factory. But anyway, one rubber glove to hold, one sock to polish. That is, of all the tips I remember, and I remember years ago, what we used to do years ago, you'd paint a motorcycle gas tank, and you'd have a mount where the motorcycle tank would mount to like a tripod, and you could just sit on a chair, grind away with compound, white compound, whatever, and then when we found Gorham's, wow, everything changed. Okay, let me get the phone. Now we finally arrived at the point where our parts have 4 really good, well-polished coats of the wax on. The next thing I want to do is I want to clean the PVA gun. Even though I store it cleaned, it seems like there's always some schmutz in the bottom of it, and I don't want to get any little particles of schmutz on this mold. And if you do, you got to wipe all the PVA off and start all over again. Now I learned a long time ago, I learned very quickly that if there's some little dried up flakes, and here's one that just came out of the gun, these are little dried flakes of PVA, it can make you crazy. Now what I do is I spray the PVA, I got Brillo pad in here, I'm trying to clean this cup, and when I'm done with the PVA, I'll run warm soapy water through the gun, but there's always some, it's like spraying metal flake. There's always some that stays in there. So what I try to do is get them all to come out now. Then what I'll do is I'll go boil up some water so it's almost boiling, real hot water, and spray the hot water through the gun. Because what happens if one of those little specks come out, I see we got another one here. If one of these comes out on the mold, and they have an uncanny way of just when you get the second or third coat of PVA on and everything's looking good, you get, well, that's going to appear in the final mold, so I don't want that to happen. So what I do is I take a Brillo pad, and they're usually right at the bottom, and just get in there and scrub away. Again, on a PVA gun, you would never want to do this with your good spray gun, because you're basically turning this into a PVA gun the day you do this. So it's a good idea, if you're going to do a lot of it, just keep a dedicated gun. Keep it clean. When you're done with the PVA, spray warm water with maybe even some soap through it. Now what I do, I have the old dish detergent here. It's laundry detergent. I'll mix up a batch. And then I'm going to go outside in the beautiful snow and ice that we have out there. In fact, I don't think I'm going to be able to spray outside. Spray this through the gun, and if I have to, I'll come back and clean it some more. If I have to, I'll pull it apart. But so far, I've gotten a lot of years out of this gun, but I don't think it's good enough to be using for paint anymore. In fact, you can see I mark it that it's strictly a PVA gun, and that's a good idea to do if you're going to do any molding. Okay, Okay, that gun is really clean. I've run 3 gun loads of soapy water through it. I think I got out all the little specks and flakes and everything that were in there. 90 PSI. Now, because it's freezing cold out there, we take the camera outside, but there's still snow everywhere. I'm going to then shoot the part and bring it in here to dry. It's not toxic, but I just don't want to spray it in the shop. I'd prefer to shoot outside unless it was raining or snowing. So here's the kind of day we're dealing with. And the wind is blowing, but I still would like, look, it's dripping, and still would like to get this part, get the PVA on, and tomorrow start making them old. In theory, the best way to do this is to get a light coat, relatively light coat, let it dry, and then put a wet coat on. But I've had good luck just putting several dry coats on. You just need to get enough on. The one thing you can't do is get a run. You get a run, you gotta wipe it all off, start all over again. And because it doesn't, it has a little bit of green dye in it, but you can see where it is. There's not as much as I guess would be make it easier. Boy, it's cold out here. Woo! Take that snow blast up. Painting in the snow by Lindy. And if you get a run, you just wipe it all off. It's water soluble. And just start all over again. You can see we have just a hint on there. It's going to need 2 or 3 coats. Now the fuselage has 1 coat on. The bottom piece has 2, and you can see the second coat I put on a little wetter, try to get it to flow out. We'll get the second coat on the big part. It should really dry in between coats, and if we need a 3rd coat, which I think we will, it's okay. You can put it on in 3 or 4 or 5 coats, and in this cold weather it just goes on way too thick. So I'm just being very, very careful not to get too carried away here. And once it's covered with PVA, we'll be ready to, and that's dried overnight, be ready to build a mold. Took 5 coats of PVA, and you can see what happened, what I was trying to guard against, that one little speck. You can't, it's just going to be there. I'm not going to redo the mold for that. But that's a real nice coat of PVA. Now tomorrow what we're going to do, Les is going to come over for the day, and we're going to set up this table to work on to do the mold, because it's going to be an all-day affair. And this way, he can use this table. He's going to work on his plane. We're right under the heating vent here, and I'm going to let those dry up overnight. And tomorrow we'll be ready to start laying up the mold. Boy, is this a watershed. Today we're preparing for the big mold layup day. I cleared off as much of the table space as I could here. Checked the PVA just by touching it, and it has dried overnight. It really doesn't have to dry overnight, but I wanted it to dry anyway. See if I had any imperfections. I have that one little spot to deal with. And then what I want to do before Les gets here is I want to really be careful. I got out all my old fiberglass cloth. This is all old stuff, and what I'm going to have to do is put on a thin layer, maybe 1 or 2 thin layers. This is ½ ounce, 1 or 2 ounce. Les is bringing some 4 ounce, and then I have this real heavy mat that I can work on. The idea is to build it up. Once the gel coat sets up, that the mat, this will imprint right through. What I want to do is lay that on, put another coat, so you'll have a paper thin layer of gel coat which really has no strength, and then right behind that layer to have the cloth that gives it some strength. If you don't have the cloth in there, the gel coat, because it's very weak, can tend to chunk right out. And then just fill up. We want to build at least enough in there, enough material that'll retain its own rigidity. So I'm going to get some of the material cut ahead of time, get all that stuff ready. I'm going to work on that table, I think. I'm going to try to set up because Les is supposed to come over. He wants to use this table to work on his tails today. And of course, guess what? They're predicting more snow this afternoon, so I don't know. See how this day goes. A couple of the tricks that I've learned over the years of doing this. The night before you're going to run or make a mold, I take all my gallons of gel coat and tooling resin. And you can see what this is. Surface coat, of course, is this is what they call gel coat. They call it surface coat, and they have the hardener. Now, the mold building resin, you could pretty much figure out by reading the directions, of course, but the surface coat is the gel coat, and then the rest of the mold, or most of the, we can use any resin after that. It just turns out these two are compatible. I get all this stuff from George Spar, but a really good trick is, first thing the night before, put it up by a heating vent because this material is thick as peanut butter, and if it gets cold, and I've come down to the shop, we keep the temperature here 50 degrees at night. It has a computer that turns on the thermostat, and I've tried to use this material, and you can't use it until it warms up, so I just leave it by the heating vent now, and then from that point on, it's usable. Now the first thing I need to do is mix up some of the gel coat and take each one of the molds and just put what amounts to be a coat of paint on it of the gel coat. And I'm going to try to do this before Les gets here because then I can use this table to my advantage. Otherwise I got to work over there on a smaller table. Easier to do this here. And then what I'll do is put it right up where the cans are now by the heating vent. So that'll kind of keep it a little bit warmer than the ambient temperature in here, which is usually about 60 degrees, 60, 62 degrees. The reason for having slow temperature, all of the resins and all of the products that we use to make these composite parts, the cure rate slows down in cool weather, so it gives you more time to work on the part and get out the air bubbles, even the molding rubber. But then once you have the part laid up, you want to get it up by some heat. So you have the two conditions. You want it cool while you're laying the part up and warm while it's setting up. Now as soon as that first coat of gel coat sets up, and that's usually, it could be an hour, it could be 3 hours, then we'll start laying in our layers of cloth, and we should be ready to go. And hopefully by that time Les will be here. He can be a big help too. It's always good if you have a helper when you're making a mold this big or a set of molds this big, that's for sure. Little common sense tips you'd probably want to use anyway. I am very comfortable now. The last couple of years, Bill Hummel has been giving me the benefit of using rubber gloves, and it took him a long time to convince me, but my hands have healed up nicely, and I've not had any of the little infections and things that I have from using these different materials, even just ordinary lacquer thinners, dope, anything. Rubber gloves are your best friend. And once you get used to using them, you wonder how you ever did it before. Okay, so we want to take the... Oh, it's nice and warm. Make sure I got the right one. 01A. You can pretty much figure this out, the way they make the labels, and George is pretty good. It's got the ratio, you mix it out, it's got directions that are in such small print you can hardly, it tells you not to drink it or pour it on a bird or something. And I always write on top of this the last project I worked on. So I know this is from 2003, it's probably still got a good shelf life, but not always. A lot of times if you store stuff where it's real hot, if you put it in an attic, say, or something, maybe the shelf life is less. I don't know. But always good to do a little test. We'll make up our first batch, and we have to do it with a gram scale. We'll make our first batch of material up, take the smaller of the two molds, and paint on the gel coat, and let that kind of harden, and see how we like it. Because if one of them is not going to harden, then we have to take and believe me, getting it off is a nuisance. Wipe it off, clean it off, or whatever, and order some new gel coat. But I hope we're not going to have to do that. This is usually a couple of years shelf life. It's 2003, so this should be relatively good. I paid the price the hard way one time trying to use up some 5-year-old gel coat that somebody gave me. Any epoxy, all epoxy, has a relative shelf life. And when it's out of code, when it's out of its typically there's ways of rejuvenating it with heat and stuff, but it's never as good as just having fresh material. Gel coat is usually so thick, and you can see what it's like peanut butter. So you need some kind of a trowel really to get it out. You can't pour it. It doesn't pour until you add the hardener. Very thixotropic. But the only thing we can use this for, the only thing it's appropriate for, is to make a skin is the right word. A skin of material right around the mold. And from that point on, we need reinforcing either e-glass, carbon, Kevlar, something. Now, I don't want to mix too much of this. Done that in the past. I need to weigh it, of course. Got to do this all with a scale. And this part of it can be, gel coat, by the way, is as heavy as can be. If you want to see what gel coat looks like, just look at any boat, any modern motorcycle fairings and everything that are made out of composite. They're all made with a gel coat skin. When you go to places like Indianapolis or places where you have professional racing stuff, you don't have gel coat on the parts. They generally, the carbon goes right to the outer skin. In general, anyway. They eliminate the gel coat because they don't get any strength out of it. Of course, the gel coat is pretty, that's one nice thing, but you pay. Okay, now this is 10 to 1. I just want to make sure. So I can add this. Oh boy. Maybe King Kong to open these cans after a while. And I'm only going to mix this once on camera. And the trick is, get it almost ready. When the scale starts to move, I put it to the weight that I want it at. As soon as I see it start to move, then I got to just drip it in. And then the trick, as always with epoxy, is mix it 2 minutes long. There we go. 2 minutes longer than it has to be. So now we can put this away. And using now the mistake that I've made too is I've taken a stick like this and mixed it, and some of the resins, not all of them, some of them, the wood picks up some of the hardener, and you don't get the right mix. Epon, for instance, you never stir with a wooden stick. So I've gotten in the habit of just never stirring anything with a wooden stick. As an easy way of doing it, let me get rid of that out of here. I have a brush, 1-inch wide brush. I'm going to take my steel mixing stick, and this is one of the things that's going to take time, so we'll do this mostly off camera. When this gets mixed, we're going to mix it 2 minutes more, and then this will be ready to paint on our first coat of gel coat. But it's really thick, when it's in this state, it almost won't, if you turn a cup over, it won't fall out. It's almost like peanut butter. When you put the hardener in, it gets a little thinner anyway that you can brush it. Now, a mistake I've made too is I've tried to put the glass reinforcing right in this coat, and it doesn't work as well as it should because some of the glass fibers wind up in the edge of the mold where you can see them, and then you get little imperfections. Especially if it's a wheel pant or a cowl mold. You want to have a nice smooth surface. You don't want to have to sand forever. You want to just be able to scuff it up with 80 grit and put the finish on. All right, now that's, once it's stirred, I wanted to show this. Now you see the consistency has changed? Now the consistency is such. Now when it's like this, and I think it's mixed, I'll look over at the clock, give it 2 minutes more mixing, and then we'll be ready to paint the mold. Now here's what I found to be important. These brushes, of course they're inexpensive, I get them at Home Depot, they tend to lose hairs along the way. Well, anywhere that we're going to see the part, and in this case we're going to see the whole part, we got to pick the hairs out as we go along. And I just want to get, it's almost like painting, but I'd like to leave, you know, a relatively thick coat on everything. And it's made to be viscous. Fixotropic is the word they use in composite work, so that it doesn't run. And all the work we've put into this plug now is going to depend on if we get a nice coat of gel coat on here. Let me show this up close. Again, this is just slow. I'm not in a rush to get this done because this stuff is going to take an hour or so to kick off. But this is going to ultimately, when it cures up, is going to be the skin of our mold. This is where the part is actually going to rest up on when we're going to lay up a part. I want to get that edge real nice if I can. Now, rather than making this long and boring, and it's long and boring when you have to watch it, it's even more long and boring when you have to do it. I'll do this to both parts, get them up by the heating vent, and by then Les should be here, and we'll probably start working on his tail, because this has to be tacky to the touch. There's a hair right there. This has to be tacky to the touch before we can lay the cloth on. Otherwise the cloth sinks through and imprints into the final part. Okay, we got one part covered with the gel coat, and that's got to go to the final state where it's tacky and we can stick our fingernail in it so the cloth doesn't bleed through. We'll do the other part off camera and then come back to this when we have the gel coat fully tacked out on both parts. Okay, the only thing we got to do now, let the gel coat gel out. Both pieces are done. And now we just wait, and probably while Chicky, pain in the ass. While we're waiting for this to dry, if Les gets here, and he should be here within the hour, we'll clean this table off and we can work on his tail or whatever parts of his plane he wants to work on. Because this typically takes, in the shop conditions the way they are right now, this is going to take a couple hours to tack out, so we'll get something else done and rather than just sitting around looking at it. But again, the problem I've had in the past, I've been impatient and right away got the next, start to put the cloth on and the cloth bled through. So you really have to get this that you have to stick, you can stick your fingernail in and can't go through. Just some patience.
Okay, remember how we said when you build a tapered surface in hand, or build it flat, you got a little bit of a distortion?
Right.
Okay. Here's the skin. We're going to lose this leading edge, and we're going to lose the trailing edge that we glue on here. But what we're doing is we're going to take this, glue it on, take this, glue this edge right on the center line.
Okay, make a jig, yeah.
And that makes a jig. Then weight down both ends, and that holds things steady while you're putting the first ribs in, and you know you got it symmetrical. Glue on the top. This will stay. Just carve this down. This will be the trailing edge cap.
Yeah, when you're done, carve it away.
On the front.
Yeah.
And we're done. So my next step will be to take this up and glue this on the trailing edge.
Now, have you cut the ribs out for this yet, or? No. Okay. Make a little pattern for the ribs, I guess.
Now notice what I did, because this thing, I put a little pitch in here, because when you lift up the tail, that brings this to vertical.
Right, right. All right, no reason that shouldn't work.
Well, we'll see.
But even so, when you're all done, and you have those elevators in your hand,
Yeah.
it's very easy to sight them and just see if they're straight. I mean,
Oh, I agree.
if you have built them crooked, you'll know right away. It won't take long to figure that out.
Okay.
All right, so you're going to snap one together. We're waiting for gel coat to dry up here. And so we'll see if we can build some elevators and some other little accoutrement projects. We have some more. Believe it or not, we never run out of tune pipes for Rich Holloway. There's a bunch more pipes over there. He's piping us to death. Could have built another model without having to make all those pipes. So you're making progress here.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you're laying out the block of wood where you want to put the horn? Wes has got one, these are from Tom Morris, Morris adjustable
That's the
horns.
adjustable. If we need to, we'll be able to get a faster elevator travel than the flaps with this.
And he's got his little, I call it a little like a Lincoln log thing where he's building it up off the table. Very nice.
Well, we'll see how it works out.
Yeah.
We will see, we will see. In the meantime, I gotta put the diagonals in. They're gonna be a little bit of a son of a bitch to fit.
Like he said, they're gonna be a son of a gun to fit. Oh, Buzz, he's sorry. I know he's sorry.
I'm not sorry, folks. I'm not sorry.
He's not in the Christmas mood here.
Bah humbug. All I get is coal.
Anyway, look over on
For carbon fiber, they give me coal.
my computer. These are the first photos of the Brodak, one of the planes that are being pre-made in the Orient, and will be available soon. This is the Oriental. Actually, we have a whole bunch of these pictures out there. Actually, I think the resolution on this is better than if you do printers, when you print something and it's not on a good quality paper. But again, this is the first of the planes that'll be very similar, in fact. Now, let me tell you why I think they're going to be a lot better, because Top Flight really, there's a few engineering weaknesses in their equipment. And what happened, this is from Bob Zambelli and Tom Hampshire, have already gone through this and made some detail changes to make the ones that'll be the production ones even better. And I think that's a significant advantage they'll have over the Top Flight, the comparable Top Flight kits. But then everything Brodak does is constantly under improvement. And flaps and the fillets.
2 5/16.
Stabbing elevators. Is the rotor.
Oh, let me see some of these. Now that you know how to operate.
Oh, yeah, now we got this clicking on and off here. I'm an expert.
Now, you know what? I don't know whether... I think I see grain there.
Well, it's monocoated.
Yeah.
But it looks like at least they have 1/2 inch by 3/8 motor mounts. And it looks like they've real plywood doublers there, which would probably be a real good thing. So I hope this little sneak preview gets some people excited about the possibility, because in our event there are definitely a lot of people that do not want to build their own models or don't have the time or just want to go sport fly. They don't care about contests and appearance points. They just want to go out to the field and fly. And this will really fill a big need. And I think as we get older, more of us fit into that category and less into the hard-nosed competitor where every little thing's a problem. The stab area. The tail wheel mount. The wing saddle. And what looks like the hatch to access the belt crank. Anyway, we plan on hopefully having one of these in the shop before too long, but Bob Zambelli and Tom Hampshire are already working on detail improvements before the production models are even made. And I think that's really a good way to develop any new product, is get some people to get some feedback before 1,000 of them are out in the real world. And I want to congratulate John for bringing this to market, and I'm sure very soon in 2004 these will be available. Get on the waiting list now. Those little weights from Tom Morris look like they work pretty good.
They work real well.
They're just about the right weight that, you can't put an anvil on it.
No. I'm sure with his usual precision, Tom has thought everything out. Too much. Still too much. That's about right.
As soon as the camera's running, he glues his hand to the table or
I
something.
didn't glue it on here to the table, but I'm not pleased with that aspect of things. The rib shifted just a little bit. The horn receptacle in, and then this'll glue right in, while it's weighted, you know.
Let it dry overnight?
Yeah.
Now, you're gonna put the receptacle for the horn, a tube or
Yeah.
piece of plywood?
Yeah, I gotta find the, I think
The tubing is under here, there's tubes here.
I think I got a piece over here. Yep, this is the piece I use for the landing gear blocks
Oh, okay.
in the wing. So we can take
Taking elevators, we're ready to do the second phase of this now. This is like fly paper now. You can touch it, but it's not totally dry. It's right at the point where it should be. Now, this part of the resin system is ETO2A, and the kicker is 15%, not 10%. We're going to mix the same thing, but notice, this is what I wanted to show. This particular tooling resin, you got to stir. You see how it kind of separates as time goes by? So before I even mix it, and I'll mix it off camera. You want to mix it, get that all homogenized, otherwise the whole batch just becomes very tentative whether it's going to dry properly. And we have all the cloth pre-cut. I cut about 10,000 pieces of cloth. But the first thing is to put in a layer of ½ ounce over each one of the pieces. And again, let that go to tacky where it's like fly paper, and then we'll start adding the heavier cloth. Perfect. Now you can see this material is a little bit thinner, so it goes on a lot more like paint. Again, the secret to all these materials is to stir them much longer than you think they need to be stirred. When you think they're done, they're not really done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the whole part. Then Les is going to come over and we're going to drop a piece of ½ ounce cloth right over this, just like putting a bed sheet on. This material goes on. No, he's not. He changed his mind. Flapper boy over there changed his mind.
I'm too busy here.
That's right. I have Chicky as a replacement.
Oh, good. Yeah, I remember that the last time he epoxied his beak together.
Whenever we do these jobs, we have to watch out for the fear of Chickadooley flying into the wet epoxy. And he's done it already. So basically, I'm just going to go right down the whole thing here. Les has personally guaranteed he will not go home tonight till he has 2 elevators. So we're looking for greatness from him.
It made no sense.
Moments of greatness coming for Wendy and Les. I gave him extra coffee, extra caffeine, the smell of epoxy in the cellar, holiday music on the radio. Just doesn't get any better than this. But someday, a long time from now, when we're out flying the bomber out on the new field that we're going to hopefully have in the spring, paid. They've been working on it, by the way, on a regular basis. So I hope we're going to be able to get to use it. And we're going to be flying the Paladin, the soon-to-be-finished Paladin, and the soon-to-be-finished bomber. Man, I can see how Boeing falls behind in their production schedule here. Anyway, this resin, too, has a real nice long life, this pot life. So we really don't have to rush as much as we think we do, but I guess it's just a habit of trying to work quickly. Some of the other resins kick off a little quicker. Want to get the whole part painted. Resined, I guess, getting all the corners and edges. Okay, Les, whenever you're ready, baby.
You're ready for me, huh?
I am ready. Hey, we're not fooling around here.
All right, tell me what we're going to do.
Okay, if you grab those 2 corners, and I grab those 2, you can let it hang over the edge as much as you want. It doesn't even have to fit. We just want to make sure you cover everything.
Okay.
Go to me, so.
Watch the tail end.
Okay. It's not going to lay down wrinkle-free because you can pretty much figure out. Just try to stretch it as much as we can. That'll work. I can do the rest with the brush.
All right, now watch, see what's happening here? Is this
Not a problem at all.
This stuff is bleeding through.
That's exactly now.
Okay.
I should be able to show this on the camera. It's bleeding through, and this is pretty much what I'm going to do is just work this piece of material out until it's in all the corners and edges. We don't even care if it has a wrinkle. You will not see the wrinkle in the final part because you have the gel coat there.
Who gives a darn about the wrinkle?
So it's a question of, and I'm only going to show this one little part, then we're going to let this dry, get tacky, and then we're going to move on to putting the layers of 4 and 6 and 8 ounce cloth right on top of it until we build up about a little more than 1/8 of an inch of thickness. And we hope that we can get this all done today. And again, this just gives that first layer a little strength that you wouldn't have if you didn't have the cloth in there. You might be pulling big chunks of gel coat out. And it looks like, for all purposes, we have a decent layup of the gel coat. This is right now the largest mold, except for the wings, the largest fuselage mold we've made. But down at George Venturini's shop, they have a C-119 that there's a fiberglass fuselage the size of a garbage can. I was amazed at how big it is. We have to get down there and take some video of that before he finishes it. Really, it's an RC kit that somebody makes. And basically I'm going to work the whole mold and then work the whole rest of the bigger one. Same way. Plowed onto this end of the mold, I'm starting to add the 4 ounce, and then after this we'll put some 6 ounce on there. And pretty much just layering in one layer at a time until we build up enough of a thickness. What I try to do is just overlap each one, maybe 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. That just helps the resin that's underneath already, because we've already painted it, come up through. We got all our stuff is pre-cut. Doesn't really matter. And then in times in the past I try to do it in one big piece. Wasn't really necessary. As long as that gel coat dries up the way you want it, the rest of this is really just here to make a bathtub. We want to get just enough on there that we can get the next layer of glass on there too. And it's pretty self-explanatory. Once we get that one on, we can just go lay out the next one. Just put the next one right on top. So we've interlocked all the little edges. As long as you see the resin coming up through, you know you have it pretty well. And it's going to be just a question of doing this 6, 7 layers. We'll use up the material we have. We have about 4 or 5 yards of that stuff. Another good tip. If you're new to this, don't mix up a whole cup, mix a half a cup. What happened here, this Exotherm, it's solid epoxy, and that's so hot you can't even touch it. But because I was shooting video and moving the camera and cutting material and moving things around and helping Wes, so what happened is, I just fell behind a little bit on mixing it. So what we do have, there's about 6 layers on there now, and as ugly as it is, that's probably a pretty good mix. We're going to let that dry. While that's drying, this one up on the TV by the heat, that's probably kicked off, ready to go right now. And hopefully, I think we're going to be right on schedule for getting both of these laid up before the end of the day. Russ is working on his little piece that's going to hold the horn in place, the little tubing. Now, believe it or not, the mold is out by the refrigerator cooking, and Wes has got, I would say it's safe to say you got an elevator done today.
Yeah, this was all trial and error in here, but it looks like it's going to work out fine.
But here's the thing.
Where the horn clip is.
Right, here's the thing that always happens. Now, tomorrow we'll make another one, and it'll go in half the time.
Oh, yeah.
He's got all his little, it's not going to be real stiff till you put the top skin on.
If you don't think it's real stiff, it's real stiff now.
Well, but it'll be better with the top skin on.
Yeah.
Once you get the top skin, it'll be good. And you make another one tomorrow, you'll have flippers. I've been waiting all day to see your flippers. Just to say our progress today was, we do have it laid up. It's going to sit here overnight, maybe even an extra day before we take it apart, just in case some of the resin needs a little extra time, because it is cool in here. And it's always best if it dries in a cool area. I think so, anyway. Anytime I've tried to preheat it and put it out on a driveway where it's 100 degrees, I always get the feeling something's warping or twisting or something. Maybe it isn't, but... So it'll sit here, and we'll try to work on flippers. Can you imagine? I love flippers. Wes's elevators, Wendy's mold, it was been a pretty good day. Today in our mail from our good friend Bernie Trent, Baltimore Ravens fan supreme. He sent down a couple little catalogs that I found interesting because, of course, I have an interest in model railroading. I have a lot of little tools and little things, and Russ and I are both going to look at this because there are a lot of things, and you never know where you're going to find something. Now, when Ed Cotton comes down in February, he's wanting me to have a specific saw, a table saw. He's going to demonstrate how he makes some of his architectural models. I just love having tools. I'm just a tool guy. These are the kind of things you love to have. Look through a catalog. Maybe I get a couple of things, clamps. Again, every time I look through a catalog, I find something I find out I really can't live without. And Wes is just as bad as I am. So when the two of us are together, we talk tools. It's like just one of the things. Now, what's nice about this stuff, if you look up the website, micromark.com, and I'll put the websites. He sent 3 or 4 of these catalogs. You can usually, through the website, just get them to send you a free catalog. See, here's another one, www.eastwoodcompany.com. And you can look up these websites, and if you like tools and you like fancy things, and a lot of times there's nothing you can really use, but then once in a while you just find something, and you just can't live without it. Again, I've never found a catalog that I thought was a terrible waste of time. Here's Micromark again. I think that's the same one. But again, little grinders, little sanders, little things for making 90-degree cuts, just at random if you look at this. Just some of the things. And of course, this is the cool thing with Bernie. He's a big Baltimore Orioles fan, which of course, Bernie, so are we, because we... Not the Orioles. We want the Orioles like that match Chicky, the real Orioles. Anyway, and I did have a couple of shirts and hats, different things that Bernie has sent me. These are real nice, these Baltimore Oriole hats. I always wind up getting 1 or 2 of them in the summer. Anyway, but the big thing, he sends me this little thing, and look what's written on it. It says Chicky. Chickies. I open it up. Now, It had bird seeds in it. The only problem is I put him in Chicky's cage, he ate every single one of them. And he really isn't crazy about seeds, and I'm not starving him, but whatever Bernie, I'll ask Bernie what type of seeds these are. All of a sudden he was loving these seeds. Anyway, a couple other neat things, and like I said, Bernie is one of the cool guys. I count a cool guy. How's this? I get a loaner tape. How's that? And this is the Superman Jet Rally, 103 minutes. Now, there's only one problem with this. See that? I don't have a DVD player that I can use to convert it to a tape, so I'm going to see if I can get Mike Costello, who I think has the right equipment. But I have a DVD player and I have a video recorder, but I don't have them interconnected. I have them set up. My son set them up in a way, so it would be easy for him to set them up. And here's some cool stuff he took at an air show down in I guess in the Baltimore area, but some of the things that I always love, there's some warbirds in here that are real nice. Let's focus in on these. We'll go through these pictures, and Bernie, I gotta tell you, this one is nostalgic as can be. But Al Knight would like to see that. Looks like that's maybe a zero, I don't know. No caption, so I can't tell what some of these aircraft are. And this doesn't look like they've taken an AT-6 and converted it. It looks like the real deal. But I'm not sure. An Avenger. I remember going to an air show and seeing an Avenger up close and being impressed with how big of a plane it is. Like there's a typical size of a person. It's a large airplane. And I've seen in Warbird magazines that they say an Avenger flies like a big cub, unlike some of the Warbirds that are difficult to fly. Nice picture of Corsair. Dauntless. Look at the size of the guy. Now that's the guy standing next to the propeller on a Corsair. Gives you some idea how big these are. Oh, here's one. Talk about if you're looking for a nice paint job, something unusual. That's beautiful. Pictures of a P-51. T-Bolt, the checker cowl, invasion stripes, another Stang photo. This is nice. I always like detail shots like this, like they're showing them. Let's get this in focus. How to load the bullets into the machine guns. If you were making a scale model, you'd probably want to have that somehow computerized and shrunk down. Another one of my favorites, Kitty Hawk, P-40. And of course I saved the best to last. There's only one king of aircraft, the B-25. There's another B-25. In fact, there must have been two at the air show. And by the way, Warren Walker is going to be sending us that video. It's already in the mail. It's in the pipeline, and he's scheduled to get a ride in a B-25. Just had a battery go dead on us, so I hope we didn't lose any of this real nice footage. Love those B-25s. Anyway, from our friend Bernie Trent, he is really enjoying every minute of watching Windy videos, so we're happy for that, and we will be seeing him at Brodax 2004. Bernie, thanks a whole lot. I'll be sending you some of my Warbird paraphernalia, something we can swap out here. Thanks a whole lot. Now, this is a real serious moment for me anyway. Tomorrow is the day, the 100th anniversary of flight. Now, years ago when we were doing the Spitfires, Joe Adamusco gave me this, and it's a copy of the patent for the wing warping system of the Wright brothers. And he gave me the certificate that goes with this, because this is an authentic Orville Wright signature, and it's authenticated, and I would never sell it, so I don't care what it's worth. But I have that hanging in my shop, among other things here. And on the 100th anniversary, it's funny that we're just talking about this with thinking about Bernie Trent, who sent us down all that real neat stuff that related to the Wright Museum. I'd love to go see that, but the more I find out about the Wright brothers, the more I realize, boy, they weren't just special, they were very, very special. So it's an honor to have a little piece of history here in my shop, thanks to Joe Adamusco, and something we'd obviously never sell or never trade or anything. That is a treasure that I will have forever. And just another special thanks to Joe for that years ago. It's never left the walls of my shop. Also, Warren Walker asked me to put the word out on my videos. If anybody has any pictures of the Red Baron, he's taken a Strega kit and he's going to convert it into a Red Baron. And I know several people have had literature with pictures of the Red Baron. I have some that I'm going to send them, but if you do, that's, boy, that'd be a real neat thing. And he can get the pictures signed by Steve Hinton or any of the guys out by him at the Warbird, I guess, museum that they have out there. We're going to hear more from Warren in the near future, but if you have any Red Baron pictures you'd like to loan Warren Walker, and he's out in California, and he's a great guy. And to be honest, I've always considered myself kind of one of the Wright brothers, one of their evil stepchildren or something, but the truth is, when I watched that video about what they did in inventing powered flight, I'm blown away. They're so far ahead of me, it's not even worth looking in the mirror. Anyway, if you ever get a chance to see anything relating to the Wright brothers, don't miss it. It's incredible stuff. They are really two special guys. And every time I learn more about them, I know how much more special they are than I thought they were in the beginning. Well, this is pretty cool because it's the anniversary of the Wright 100th anniversary of flight. The Turner Classic Movies is having 24 hours of aviation movies, and I'm trying to record them all. Really, this is just great. All these old black and white movies. I can add these all to my collection. I can do it all in one day, too. And while we're working, of course, this makes it great, something to take your mind off the fact that some of this work is boring. The 100th anniversary of flight today. We're about 2 hours away from it, too. Just wanted to, one of the next things I'm going to be doing is making the cowl mounts for the A-26, but just some generic information that may be helpful on any plane that you build. Now, if you look at how a Cardinal is built, and I'm just going to sketch this out, what you'll notice is the cowl comes down like this and has a little lip, and what happens is the bolts, the hold-down bolts, go down here, and usually you would have a pin in the nose. That's been the two ways that we've done it. Now, what's nice about any system where you have redundancy, you tend to get the whole part held in place. What has happened in the past, some of the planes I've made, for instance, they would have well, let's just make a cowl a different shape, and it would be one bolt here holding it. Well, what would happen in time, the front would get loose, this front end would start vibrating, it would chew away the cowl area, and then I'd have to figure another way to do it. Well, another way that I liked as far as cowl mounting went in the past, I did it on a Sidewinder. I made a big piece like this, and I had 4 bolts, and the bolts were flush mounted, pan head where they had an angle on them so they were flat. And I think a stiletto was mounted similar to that. I think that's what I copied when I did it. But again, here you have two things that are happening. This is a compression mount where you're actually squeezing the part in position. And you should pick up at least two places. It shouldn't just be held in with one bolt. Dan Banjock learned that at one of the previous Nats on one of his official flights. Right as he landed, the cowl fell off. And we even remember videotaping that. But he has since modified to having more than one bolt holding it in, but more than one bolt and more than one position. A Cardinal typically shows two bolts in the back. The reason for that is if one bolt happens to fall out, you don't want this cowling to just go flying off and hit somebody. This system is good. Rich Jacobone uses this where there's little tabs on here. And what it tends to do is keep the two sides in position. This is not a compression mount. This is a compression mount. This is a shear mount. You have to shear the bolts. A shear mount can be made real nice because you can get this edge to fit real tight. This way, the edge is always squeezing against itself, so it could, well, tentatively be a problem. But anytime you engineer up a cowl mount, think in terms of redundancy. More than one bolt, shear bolts, or maybe a combination of both. Or if you're going to have a plane, and I don't know exactly how we're going to hold future planes together, but Mike Cooper's working on a bottom block for Strega, like Miss Ashley, that goes all the way back here. Well, you would want to have something up by the front, typically pins, like we have on the Typhoon, pins in the front, and possibly some shear bolts. Maybe even three, I don't know. But the answer is, the one thing to avoid is to have a big cowling that's held on with one bolt. That's really where you run into a problem. Now with the A26, the one bright spot of doing the cowling mounts was I had made this ring inside the back of the cowl, and I may get time to do this today. Made it bigger than it had to be, figured out where, and three bolts hold the cowls on. So even if one falls out or breaks or shears or whatever, the part isn't going to fly off and go into the propeller. Then what I did, I removed some of the material just to lighten it up here, but I left three tabs that hold the cowls on. And this was basically done with 1/8" plywood. So it was a compression mount. It mounted right up to the firewall. Now, that worked real well, and we want to do that again on the A26. So again, we're trying to take all the good parts from the B25 and put them into the A26. Except what I'm going to try to do is make this material, I used originally 1/8" plywood. I'm going to try to laminate up some 64th plywood, maybe with a little carbon mat in between, so I can make a little bit lighter system. And then when I mount it, the last piece, as the cowl mounts, this piece will be inside the cowl. The last piece, I'll glue it to a piece of 64th plywood. And after it's dry, trim it off. And what that'll be, where this piece comes down, it'll give me a little bit of a tongue area, like a dovetail. This will be off. So it'll give me this little area here, and this should be even stronger than the original and give me an edge, which is what I want. Again, we're always looking for an edge. The edge would be 64th plywood, and it'll dovetail that last little piece right in there. I think that'll be a nice way to do it. Just some thoughts you might want to think about if you're making a cowling for one of your future planes. This way worked well. I think this will be a little bit of an upgrade. You remember, as we just got done refinishing this bottom pan, but the fit has stayed real nice over the years. That's been a nice way to do it. There's 3 bolts hold that on. That's been a real good, relatively good way to do it. And the fit stayed nice, and it hasn't had a tendency to get loose or come off. So that, I think that way worked pretty well. The Typhoon had a really large cowling and a piece that comes off on the bottom. But again, several screws hold it on. It's not a one-screw deal. These cowls, I don't know if you can see them, they're held in by basically three hard points. And we're going to try to replicate that something similar to that, except we're not going to have these cowl flaps. These would not be exactly how I want to have the 826. I want to have it with the flaps closed and with those exhausts that are prototypical that come out. So we're going to make a little bit of a change, but something that I think is going to look really realistic and be even a little more reliable and bulletproof than the original.
Try to make those little louvers, those little outlets that go around there. But again, I'm not sure that that's how it's going to ultimately wind up, but we have plenty of time to improvise this. But making up the mounts today will get us one step further ahead while we're waiting for Les to come over, and then he can use the table to work on his tail.
We made a wide array of parts with different materials, tested different materials and resins, came up with what we think is the best system. These cowls wound up being about 13 grams, the nicest ones. The ones that are a little heavier are about 15 grams, but we have plenty of them. So the advantage is if we want to switch to a different kind of motor or and we're anticipating using the new Richard Oliver motors, not the bar stock motors, the ones that are made around Thunder Tiger 36s, that he hasn't even got one ready yet, but that's the way we've always worked. We always do some of the prototype testing anyway. So we want to get the two cowls of choice out of our batch here, trim them off, get them sanded, and then start making up the mounts. And Mike Costello will be over later this week. We want to let him pick through the cowls, pick two for himself. And again, he'll be making a model right alongside of us. He's well along into making his. I think he's got the tail done, but I'm not sure. He took the plans anyway. Now the first step I have to get is, Les brought a real good compass over. I have to make myself a ring that'll fit inside of here. That'll be a nice plug-in fit. Les made this little box yesterday, a nice little thing made out of a box, so we hang this up. Because this is a precision tool, and it's his, mainly of course. If it was mine, it would be all beat up by now. It's a nice compass, and we can use this to get exactly... I want to make a pattern for this diameter, and then I need a pattern for this diameter minus 3/32 of an inch, which will be the planking that'll be on the fuselage. Then I can use that template to make my firewall, cowl mount, all of the formers that'll be up to about 3/4 of the way back to the wing will all be this constant diameter, except the wing will be cut out of some of them. So starting this program off with a precision compass is really a nice idea. So we tried to make this as accurate as possible. And of course we'll try to cut this off. I want a real precision fit here. I want it to be, I don't want it to be sloppy at all. I made this a little bit oversized, and what I'm going to do is just with a hand sander, sand it until it's exactly a press fit in there. And then that'll be my pattern. And I have the other cowl too, so it's everything I do I have to do double here. Maybe I'll just get the parts cut out here as it falls inside. What I did, I copied the exact diameter, but of course because it's a composite part, it's rough here, and we want it rough so that we can get a good glue bond. So I just left this over, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the, where is it? As he loses the parts. I'm going to take that sanding tool and basically just remove a little bit at a time until I get the fit that I want. Because I want this to be almost a press fit in there. And then this will then be my pattern. And then I can make the parts, put the incline on, sand off the incline, and they should be a plug-in fit. Like, this is a part that needs a precision fit. Otherwise, if I didn't do this real accurately, the cowl would get squeezed in a lot of dimensions, and we're going to have those, I hope, sexy-looking air outlets coming out of here on the final plane. So this will be a focal point, and when you look at it, you don't want to see an egg-shaped cowl. We'd like it to be as round as possible. That last few thousandths off is, I don't want to make it a sloppy fit. So I've been taking just a little bit off at a time, so it would be a real precision fit in there. And remember, we're going to be doing this with secondary bonding resin, special glue, so we don't want to, I've roughened this up already and taken some material out of there, try to make a rough surface. So this will have a good area when we make the real part. This is a pattern. This will be the part, and it'll get a good bond in there. That's the precision fit I've been looking for. So now I have a real accurate pattern, and when I trace this out onto what will be the actual mount, then I should be able to just take my tool, take off the ink line, and I'll be right on the money. And then my line in here is how much skin I'm going to have. It's allowing 3/32 of an inch for the skins that are going to be on the outside of this. End up with what I hope is going to be a final template. And again, this will be my inner, and I'll just, once I use this, then I'll remove this extra little bit of material so we won't have to waste another piece of material. And I'm just allowing, this will be the thickness of the planking or the skins or whatever we're going to do on the outside of this. Again, and by using the same template, we hope we're going to have some relative consistency here. Without that nice precision fit, none of this is going to be as accurate as I want it to be. So I'm spending a lot of time making sure this fits and make sure it fits in both cowlings, because these can get a little thicker or thinner depending on if there's a wrinkle in the material, not a wrinkle, a lap joint. And these do have lap joints because we didn't make it out of one piece. But then it's real important to take some of that material out of here, and I did that with a carbide tool just so I could get this to be a nice tight fit. So it's time to make these parts up. And I have to, what I'm going to try to do is try a couple of different materials and find them, maybe make 2 laminations of 64th plywood. I got to do a little test here and see what material I want to use. This was just a test to see if the thickness that I want to have, because I'm going to remove most of this, but yet I want this to act as a compression ring so it can't squeeze. And I'm going to relieve it where the 3 bolts are going to be, but I wanted to try to lighten this up if I could. Again, keeping a nice fit. I want this to be right up on the back of the edge too. That's trick number 2. Of course, we're going to be bonding this in with secondary bonding resin. This then becomes our mount, and when we lay this flush on a piece of 64th plywood, the plywood gives us that nice edge. So now I'll just replicate this piece so that I can basically get that piece of 64th plywood on there. I think this will work fine. And this is a handy tool. A roll of sandpaper, you can just roll off how much you need. Whenever you need to, well, it's easy if it's glued in, of course. But whenever you have to sand a curve like this down and you want to get it nice, it also gets rid of some of the stress risers because you don't grind little notches into it. And you can make the diameter infinite. You can wrap it around any round object. You want to take a little kerf off, just a slight little bit. A lot of times what will happen is you use the carbide cutter and it takes too much off. It just takes chunks out. Well, when you want to get a nice wide radius, a lot of times especially on plywood, the tool I found real handy, and these come in all different grits. You can buy them at Home Depot. We got smooth ones, rough ones. These are very, very handy. And let me just show us. This is the kind of tip I think is real useful. You can run the thing slow and say that little amount you want to take off. You can work right up to a pencil or a pen line. It doesn't gouge. You can get right up to a pen line. Very nice to have those little tools. And again, I got them in Home Depot. Sure, I don't know what they call them. or what they're made for, and they seem to last forever, because as they wear out, they expose another piece of sandpaper. So, a good little investment, maybe a good little Christmas present, whatever. Okay, so now we have two exact cowl rings matched, and I wanted them to be exactly accurate before I start making things where one is bigger than the other, even by a pencil line. Now what I did, I just epoxied the ring inside, and I want to make sure it's flat. It's on a piece of Teflon. Make sure it's flat before I go to the next step. I guess I'll have to hold this or put a weight on it for a few minutes, but that'll give me the ring mounted inside. Now the next step is to put epoxy on this whole perfectly flat surface. Glue this down to another piece of plywood. So now I have the edge that I want, and I can just trim all this around, and I also have the dovetail joint where the inside part is on the inside, this is on the outside. I should get a nice flat edge too, and then I'll build a little fillet of glue, maybe even throw some carbon fiber cloth in there to make a little radius inside. And basically I'm not going to be done with this until the final part of this whole operation is going to be when I get the little hard points. And we'll make those probably out of 1/8" plywood or something like that. I don't have hard points on here yet. And then I can trim away almost all of that ring, except maybe for the last 1/16 or so of an inch. Best thing to do on these is going to be to just trim off all the plywood, of course, and then do a final sanding. I sanded this one just to see how it would come out before we actually did it. This one needs to be sanded yet. Again, you can never have this shiny surface and put a finish on it. Next step in our little process here, I want to get the whole skin scoured with 80 grit paper so you can pick up the little low spots. And there are always some little low spots you can work on. Before we put any kind of finishing material or supplies on here, I want 80 grit scratches. This is 80 grit paper. Very rough. If you don't have the part scratched up when you go to finish it, you'll never get a good bond onto the finish. Now the other thing I did is I set up my little block here so that I can get this edge dressed right in. Remember, this piece of 16th plywood, 64th. This becomes our, actually it's 16th, it's 32nd and 64th. This becomes our hard edge that's going to be the part that mates right up onto the fuselage itself. So I want to get a nice 90-degree edge there. And that's about what the surface has to look like before we put any finishing material on it at all. Now, if you're wondering, and again, I probably said this before, but if you wonder why we don't just put gel coat in the mold, because these parts that now weigh 10 and 11 grams, they're gonna weigh a whole lot more. They're gonna probably weigh 3 times that amount. And that's one of the things, other people that have worked making composite planes and been concerned with the finish, getting a shiny finish so it looks like a boat, but the models usually tend to be a little heavy. Or they tend to be boats. But they never sink, so. The method I use, you don't use the outer layer as part of your skin. You put the skin on, just like you do with a regular model. And of course we'll be using Blodak dope. Keeping parts this light, very, very difficult. Other events, giant scale RC for instance, or gliders, don't achieve anything near this weight ratio that we have. Not even close. In fact, when I was at Jeff Stifel's and I saw his tow-line gliders, the way they're made a lot more like boats than they are like the models we fly. Anyway, I'm going to get both of these sanded and wipe them down with M600, and they pretty much be ready for the next step. And I'm not sure if I want to lay out the inside of this, lay out the parts that we're going to use as hard points. Once I get these sanded out, I'll figure out what I want to do next, but You can see we got a real nice surface on there. And these parts really are nice and solid. And they will never deteriorate with oil soakage or any of that. They're forever. Next thing, with having these pieces in one piece, I need to lay out 3 hard points. And I'm going to use the same bolt pattern, basically, that worked for us so well on the, really a triangle, on the B-25. So what I want to do, I want to lay it out on this piece here. I want to lay out the equivalent of what's going to be one of 6 hard points. And I guess these will be, let's see, we can realistically get these down to this diameter. You can use up a piece of scrap plywood, of course, for this. But what I'll do is I'll make 6 of these, drilling a hole right in the center. And I'm trying to figure out if what I want to do is I want to have one side actually this curve here. So maybe I ought to make a pattern up. It's almost straight, in fact. It needs to have a little bit of a curve in because we're going to put these in the corners. So what I'm going to do is make up a little pattern similar to this, and then lay out my 3 hard points, set my pattern in the back, drill it out, and then put the pieces in, so that from the inside, these will be really what I call hard points or cowl mounts. And it'll be very similar, almost, in fact, it's almost exactly the same as the B-25 was. And that really worked well for us. Never had a problem with the cowlings loosening or airflow or any of those things. After making up all these little pieces, what I decided to do, of course I made a template where I want these, but I decided what it would be a little bit better way to do this, just be a little bit better, because what will happen here is I'll never get these holes lined up exactly the way I want them. So what I'm going to do is make the equivalent parts without the holes drilled in them, glue them in place, first drill some holes. Notice I have the top marked. Put the little pieces of plywood in there without the holes, and then drill through the back plate, through this piece and the hole in one shot. And I just think that'll just be a little bit easier to do. Again, this is the thought process that I go through. These would be on the inside, of course. And I just looked at it and I said, just wasn't crazy about that way. What I'm going to do is lay out these parts with just a little bit bigger. Let's see. Let's be cute about it. Let's be as cute as we can. We know we need a little more material here. See, this one I just needed to think through a little better. So now that I have the holes in here, now I can glue the pieces in, and what I did, I moved the cowl points because I wanted to have the nicest part of the cowl, the part that had no joints or anything on the top. What I need to do, because the cowls are not interchangeable, they're going to have an exhaust cut out in one direction, I need to be sure I reference off the top. Just put a T here for the top. And I've made the template that I've drilled these holes, so now this side, I made a note for myself, this side goes against the bulkhead that we're going to mount the cowls to. So I should be able to transpose these holes right on to the main bulkhead. That would be a lot easier than trying to drill around a corner and through here and getting holes out on an angle. So we have this marked, which is the top. I'm going to make my little parts to go inside and then just come back and drill through the back. So now I just think this is a better method because now I can drill through and I'll get a real good alignment. Before, when I got the bolt lined up, I wasn't really touching the part, so this is just a little bit of an upgrade. And probably something you could use on other type of cowls too. But there's another important part here. If you're going along and you see something you're not happy with, just redo it. And here's the perfect case. Here's the first 6 we made, not happy, make 6 more. Somewhere in there's a lesson, but I'm not sure what it is. Have the hard points inside, and it's going to be impossible to drill, very difficult of course, but I can get the holes exactly 90 degrees just by using these points, the original holes that we made from the template. There's a lot of times when I'm doing something, and to be honest, I look at it and I say, I'm all done with it. Something that took 3 hours to do, or an hour, or 20 minutes, or whatever, and I'm just not happy with it. And you just got to be able to just say, when it's time, scrap it. Now we got our little hard points. We have the holes in the right spot. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to do the other cowl, and then I'm going to relieve some of this material away. It'll make for better airflow. But I have real good solid hard points on this now. That should be a real good cowl mount. It'll be 90 degrees to the firewall. It should be really, this should be just a good copy of what we have on a B25. It's just a question of repeating the same procedure onto this part, and that's probably all we're going to be able to get done tonight. See what I've basically done. I had a little bit of time after supper. I just thought I'd use it. Taking a carbide cutter. And what that allows me to do is minimize the amount of material that's on there and put hard points right where I want them. And now I can get in there with my bare hand and do a nice sanding job, get off all these hairs and edges. Now we're at the end of the video, but I wanted to end this with something that's really, I guess, appropriate to a lot of us. This is a picture I got today in a Christmas card from Bill Mazzoni and his family. Bill, of course, was very active in Control Line. Control Line stunt, had cardinals, had tune pipes, had everything. And he got back to one of his childhood loves, drag racing, and he's been successfully drag racing at Atco Drag Racing. This car turns 131 miles an hour and a quarter. And he seems to really enjoy it. I think his son does drag racing too, so it's kind of a father and son thing. You can see the decal Mazzoni Racing. But anyway, Bill also has an interesting point of view. Bill also had an incredible O-gauge train layout he was working on last year. And he said he's going to start rebuilding it. He's going to take the table down and restart right from the get-go. Bill, I got to tell you, I love my trains too. And drag racing, one of my loves. There's only one problem with this. When I see this, I know it's a lot of money. And I'd rather, in my case, spend the money on things that, more appropriate to the lifestyle Karen and I have. But if you give me the money, we'll go drag racing. And good to hear from you, Bill. Really, really good to hear from you. I hope you get back. And by the way, anybody doesn't know, Bill, if you're looking for Super Tiger parts or anything, hobby engine-related parts, Bill Mazzoni, he's in Pampa. He really still has quite a bit of stuff for sale. Cases and heads and hard-to-find items. Good to hear from you, Bill. Go work on that train layout. Speaking of that, I think tonight we're going to work on our train layout, but let me just give you a little sneak preview of something that may be interesting. We have Bob Zambelli has the Oriental, and I think he left a message on my machine tonight. He has the prototype Brodac Cardinal pre-made, so those are really in the pipeline and coming fast. And we're going to be going down to Bob Zambelli's in the real near future, within the next 2 weeks, eh? And we're going to hopefully see his shop, his house, his little model railroad, his Ferrari, his aeroplane, his Piper. Anyway, should be a lot of fun. Anyway, thanks for joining us. Share the videos. Share the enjoyment of the sport of model aviation in every possible way. One of my favorite sayings. And I think around Christmas time, this time of year, good time for me anyway to count my blessings that I've been able to have the life, the family, the friends, things that I've enjoyed every minute of. And I've really enjoyed making these videos. I think someday, a long time from today, somebody may look back at this and say, hey, those videos were okay. And we'll see you on the next one. Enjoy.